Hello, my name is Manek Dubash. Welcome to this Regcast on joined up IT delivery. Why investing in service-centric IT delivers business value and happy users. And with me to discuss that for the next hour or so are a software vendor, a systems integrator, and an industry analyst. And so starting at the far end, gentlemen, if you'd like to introduce yourselves, let the viewers know who you are.
My name is Ellis Paul. I'm from Microsoft. I'm a systems center, systems management specialist. Been doing systems management stuff for about 15 years now, something like that. For the last 9 of those with Microsoft. Prior to that, a number of different companies with initially my introduction to systems management with a product called CA Unicenter. So I was a specialist in that for many years, but now, of course, I concentrate on the Microsoft suite of tools for doing that work.
Hi, my name's Gordon McKenna. I work for Microsoft Gold Partner Inframon, and we are basically a specialist in the Microsoft System Center suite of products. I'm in fact myself a Microsoft System Center MVP, so I live, breathe, sleep and eat the stuff, if you like. We basically specialise in bringing service-centric management solutions to a number of large enterprise customers.
Andy.
And hi, I'm Andy Buss, Service Director at Freeform Dynamics, and we very much research and look into the deployment and usage of service-centric IT across organisations of all industries and sizes.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Okay, well, we have a big question to start at the top of our next slide. Why are we here? Okay, let's not answer that one. Let's talk about the questions underneath that one. How is IT being approached today? What are some of the problems? How can I improve this? And what can I use to help me? Well, I think we're going to be talking about that for the next hour. And we have some slides ahead of us, and we even have a software demo, I believe. So that should be interesting. And I hope you're watching carefully now, because here we go. IT versus the business world. Now, I think, who wants to talk to this one?
I'll take that one. So, we work with a lot of customers, and we hear a lot of problems around why people don't have joined-up IT and why people don't have service-centric delivery. And we've kind of put it down to a kind of IT versus business world type problem. So, on one side we have the executives, or the people that kind of finance the IT, and then on the other side we have the people who actually run the IT, the service managers, the application owners. And, on the application owner side, we find that they're constantly doing a lot of work which is unseen by the business. They're constantly firefighting the latest ad-hoc problem. They tend to have variable goals and targets and measures that they've got to hit all the time. And very often, this part of the organisation feels very undervalued and very underseen by the business. And then on the other side, we have kind of the IT executives, or the people that kind of fund the business. And quite often they're throwing money into IT and they don't really see anything out of it. All they see is applications that are unavailable or are down or are poorly performing. And we kind of call this the IT black hole effect, where money's going into the IT organisation and it just seems to be going into a black hole. And, they don't care about people, processes and technology. All they care about is, am I getting the maximum tangible benefit from the money that I'm putting into IT? They care about downtime because downtime costs them money. But basically, a lot of the IT executives tend to have a very poor perception of IT. So it's kind of almost the opposite effect of what the IT pro or the IT manager sees as well.
So it sounds like the CIO isn't doing his job.
Well, yeah, definitely. I think, quite a lot of the time we look to the CIOs and the organisations to kind of drive the message. But I think CIOs don't quite often understand the technology layer, so they don't understand about the tools that IT is using. And a lot of that is because a lot of the IT tools that people implement don't have any kind of visible layers that the executives can see. So they don't understand what's going on, and therefore find it difficult to drive initiatives.
Okay, Andy, I know you had some views on this.
Absolutely. We see this probably in about a third of companies. What we really see is a whole spectrum of approaches to IT as to how you manage it, implement it, fund it, and the value that comes out of it. So we see that this is maybe the middle of the spectrum. Some people are really, really great at driving and pushing IT. Others may be a little bit behind. It all depends on really what the business is trying to drive IT to do. And the challenge is at what level you want to operate. So is IT being challenged by the business to do more but is finding it difficult? Or is it that IT is actually being challenged to, say, find cost savings and be more efficient? And it comes down to the goal that IT needs to meet the business need.
Okay, can we kind of put a bit more flesh on the bones of this here and talk about what kind of business are we talking about here? We're talking about large businesses, small businesses, particular sectors maybe? I mean,
I think these types of problems affect businesses of all sizes and across different industries. It's very much specific to how they want to operate and how fast they're growing, for example. Are they operating in multiple countries? Do they have mobile staff? That's a challenge to get to. What types of services they've been providing, and have they grown organically? And are people, for example, expecting 24/7 availability of a system that was only put in as a convenience factor?
Absolutely. I mean, do they have a common view of these services? Often there's misaligned expectations, if you like. Sometimes the business will understand a service or know what a service should be, but to the IT people, it's just a bunch of applications, a bunch of stuff, really. They don't understand it and don't have a view on it as a service. Sometimes expectations around things like availability and performance are mismatched. They've never really been agreed. So typically, if you don't agree at expectation of we say service level agreement, some indicator of how often a service will be available between this time, that time, etc. If you don't agree that up front, then typically as a user, and certainly I will assume that service will be available to me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 100% availability, 100% of the time. So often what's lacking is just communications here and making sure we're talking about the same thing and that our longer term objectives are aligned.
Okay. So let's kind of delve into it a little bit more, talk about the analysis, and I think, Gordon, I know you wanted to talk about this one.
Yeah, definitely. I think, a common problem that we see in IT organisations is that there's no real agreed upon framework for acceptable performance. So, there's a lot of factors to take into account when you're doing things like SLAs. How much does it cost to keep an application available 99.9% of the time? And quite often, this is something which is a business IT agreement that has to take place. And again, I talked on the last slide about how there seems to be a gulf in a lot of organisations between IT and the business. So it's very difficult to get the IT and the business to sit down together and agreed upon, what is acceptable for end users, what's acceptable for critical line of business applications. And, quite often, one of the issues why this is hard to come to an agreement on is because IT don't have any way of being able to visualise performance of applications and visualise availability. And again, this comes down to having the right tools to be able to pull that data to the surface and be able to display that in a format that both the business can use and both the IT support unit. And this leads to a couple of key things, really. It leads to a lack of transparency and visibility at the executive layer, which leads to the black hole effect that I mentioned earlier, this money pouring out into a cost centre and no real benefit being seen coming back. And on the IT end, it leads to quite often reactive problem solving. We say this a great deal. Organisations still, when they invest in technology, are still using the technology to reactively solve problems rather than proactively go out and find the issues before they can service down the issues. And also as well, the lack of being able to bubble up this data leads to very poor planning and investment decisions. And I spoke to a client just this morning, for example, that was talking about how they were making very poor investment decisions because they don't have the information about how machines are performing or how infrastructure is performing under the strain of the load that it's going under.
I'd like to go back to one of your earlier points about sort of the problems of business and IT actually communicating. So are you saying that the kind of technologies we're talking about, systems management, is a way of opening the door, if you like, to the business from an IT perspective?
Absolutely. I think, a good tool that has visibility to all layers of the business is a great foundation for bringing the IT and the business together to be able to talk about those common problems.
Ellis, you're nodding away there.
Well, yeah, one thing, I know Gordon was involved in this project internally at Microsoft, so we have these problems. We have IT, we have quite a lot of IT we have to think about. We have a lot of users as well that expect the IT to be there. And we have a number of line of business applications that are very critical to us, very crucial to us. And what we did internally, and now we've rolled this into our products, but what we did internally was actually create a number of views and dashboards that showed an end-to-end picture of that service. And when I say end-to-end, one of the ends is the actual user themselves, so it's giving some insight into the actual user experience at any time. And one of the things that we found, I think it was almost a byproduct, I think Gordon probably has more, perhaps more to say about this, I know he's intimately involved with this project, but it's almost a byproduct of that project. What we found was a lot of the emotion and a lot of the heated, shall we say, discussions went out of, the finger pointing, well, it's the network, no, it's the application, no, you're doing something wrong, or whatever it might be. You've got a starting point, you've got an objective, factual view of a particular service and something to point at, something to start investigating with.
Yes, good point. And one of the things that came up from that Microsoft thing was we were able to have fact-based conversations rather than emotion-based conversations. And I think emotion-based conversations are the conversations that go on in most IT organisations. They're based on people reacting to things without actually having any facts behind it. And just having that good layer where everybody sees the same thing and everybody sees something that means something to them with related to the service-centric view that we've got can really just change that conversation and really make sure that it is a conversation where everybody's talking.
I think there's a lot of scepticism out there, and I should have said at the beginning actually to our audience that please do ask questions on the button above you, above my head. And in fact we already had a couple in, and I think the first question is, you can't tell me that service delivery as a model is going to alter this kind of reactionary effect of IT. So there's a lot of scepticism out there.
Yeah, I think, and I can understand that, because it's a hard concept. But I think proactive management is a goal that we would all like to be practicing. It's a service that we'd all like to be practicing. But I think that now IT management tools are very focused around things like running synthetic transactions, being able to simulate end user experience, and being able to simulate problems before they occur. A common thing, I was dealing with a customer last week, and they had an application that basically connected to a database, and they found that there was users coming in and using the front-end application, and it would go out and it would connect to a database, but it wouldn't be constant. And they found that now and again they would try to connect to the database, and actually the connection wouldn't be there, or the database would be down. So we put in some proactive management that basically just nudged the database, at 5-minute intervals, just to check that it was connecting correctly. It's a very small thing, but it's a way of being able to indicate problems before they come down issues. And it's that whole change in people's concept from just picking up the database when it's down to making sure that the database is alive at all times.
And it comes again down to the approach to how you want to run IT. If your approach is to be proactive, you need tools and processes and a view to running IT in that way. And what we find from our research is actually quite a few companies can achieve this. What they do is they take a service-centric view, they interact with the business and set guaranteed service levels, for example. They know what they want to achieve, they know what the input is, they know what the output is, and therefore they've got a system in place to manage it. Other companies, they don't have that. It's not really worthwhile to do so because the business isn't pushing them, and therefore maybe the investment required to get that level of proactive IT is not there, and therefore maybe it is a bit more reactive.
So it's all about mindshare.
It is about how you choose to run. It's the culture of running IT.
How is IT thought of by senior management within the business?
And this is exactly what we see. A recent survey we did in the middle of last year shows sort of really the dichotomy between, or the polarisation between approaches to IT. On the one extreme, we've got companies that view IT as a cost centre. They want to squeeze as much cost out as possible, run it maybe not efficiently, but they want to spend the minimum amount. On the other extreme, we have companies that want to invest a lot in IT for agility and for innovation. And these companies will spend maybe way over the odds in terms of their revenue, but they will see themselves moving faster, growing more quickly, and able to service more customers. And in the middle, of course, we have people who are trying to make IT better, but maybe not having the funds to transform it. So we've got a whole spectrum of approaches to running and managing IT. But if we look towards the bottom of this chart, what we can see is that where IT is well aligned with the business and is providing a platform for innovation, the approach they take tends to be service-centric. So the more aligned IT is with the business, the more they think of IT in terms of end-to-end services that are delivered. And the reason for this is it's almost impossible to guarantee the level of service or the applications unless you're taking this viewpoint.
So this aligned business, I'm a bearer of very little brain here. Explain what aligned actually means.
So when we look at it in terms of alignment, it means IT fits with what the business wants to do. It's very engaged, so the business units are talking to IT. IT understand across the spectrum of who's consuming IT, be it the business at a top level, the end users who are interacting with systems, management in between, business analysts who have to report on systems. It means that they're all getting together, talking and understanding each other. One of the fundamental things that came out of our research is that the more aligned that IT is with the business, the more that IT is actually held to account, to regular performance reviews, and meets with the business and understands the objectives. So to actually move towards a much more aligned state, it's about IT integrating with the business having a proactive mindset and being able to invest in tools to enable that type of service delivery.
And to go back to the question for a moment, I don't think any of us are suggesting this is a panacea, and it's certainly not an overnight fix. But this idea of incremental improvement actually is key to service delivery and key to service management. And we certainly on Gordon, I'm sure, and I've certainly seen practical examples of where this actually has improved satisfaction, improved, again, this proactive nature of management against reactive. So to use a concrete example, if your tools currently, you have a bunch of tools all looking at their own little bit of silo of a particular, rather than across a service view, then often the kind of alert you get at the sharp end, at the sort of help desk, may be actually quite an obscure alert about some obscure component on some obscure system somewhere. It can be sometimes very difficult to map that back to an actual service and understand the importance of that, the urgency of that. And it's not unknown, absolutely unknown, for the help desk person to kind of slide that to one side for a second and say, well, if it's important, then the help desk phone will probably go and tell me about it. And we do hear about that kind of thing. So ideally what we want is a holistic view of a service end to end, including the end user experience, so that we can be alerted. And what's more, however obscure and however down in the IT weeds this problem occurs, then it's going to bubble up to the top, and actually it's my travel booking application or my invoicing application that I'm going to have a problem with, not some weird database and perhaps I've never heard of.
Well, that's a good question, Peggy. Good issue about the end user. In fact, we do have somebody who's asked about that. Do you see business need as somehow different from requirements communicated from the end user community? I mean, how do we find out what end users want?
I think this, comes back to what you were saying about the alignment between IT and the individual business units. I think, it's important to understand what day-to-day transactions the end users are using. I've worked with a number of organisations that regularly do user satisfaction surveys, for example, to find out what the user satisfaction of accessing the applications. That could be a big eye-opener for a lot of businesses. And then, once you find out what the level of satisfaction is it poor network connection that they're complaining about? Is it applications not being available? It's being able to take workflows off those users. And one of the things that we're going to demonstrate towards the end is taking, say, for example, the top 5 business workflow that a user goes through when they access an application and replay that back from the actual locations where the users are, and then align that with the overall service model to understand what the impact of the user is, and being able to understand whether the user accessing that application, it's an infrastructure problem that's causing that, or whether it's a network-related issue, or whether it's under-resourced PCs that they're doing. Being able to get into those areas and being able to display them is a key to being able to kind of do proper service-centric management, I think.
Okay, well, let's get to the nitty-gritty of it. And we have one question already asking, what do I need to get to this? Well, I think the next slide is the start of this, talking about the core I/O framework for the data center and the private cloud. Ellis.
So this is actually a Microsoft maturity model. So we work with people like Gartner and MIT to develop this, and our own. Obviously, we talk to thousands of customers every year. So we have a good idea of where our customers are today and often where they want to get to. And this is all about most maturity models are the same. They're all about understanding where you are today and where you want to be. And until you know that, you can't really put sort of plans in place to actually start to rolling out tools and rolling out processes and procedures to get there. So this is I'm not going to talk in any depth to this slide, but you'll see effectively there we've got 4 different stages of maturity here. And core I/O is core infrastructure optimization, by the way. So basic, standardized, rationalized, and dynamic. And for each one, there's a lot of detail behind this. This is really just a slide just to introduce the concept behind this. Ideally, people will sit down with customers and go through a questionnaire to understand for various areas where they are in this maturity model and where they'd like to get to. So for some customers, going back to what we were saying before, and again, it's absolutely true, and in all sectors and all sizes of customers, we'll speak to some customers who are only purely interested in about driving out cost of IT. It's all they really care about. Other customers, IT is much more strategic to them. It delivers innovation to the business. It directly drives the business. So for those first set of customers who are just interested in driving out cost, then actually rationalised might be the place to get to. For those others, then dynamic, and dare I say things like private cloud and infrastructure as a service, etc., that we're all talking about these days, maybe that's a valid endpoint for them.
Well, of course, I've been in this business for watching the industry for 25 years or so, and as a questioner, has indeed asked, is this anything new? You know, I've been talking to Microsoft about aligning business and technology for that length of time, and yet we seem to be chasing something that never gets any closer. The question here is, what is it in the technology that's actually changed to make this viable? And perhaps more to the point, where are we going to get to the time, and where are we going to get the time and budget from to take a breather and refocus our IT department on service delivery as utility? It's all your fault, Ellis.
Well, I take personal responsibility for all of that. So I agree in a sense. There's little new here, certainly in terms of the process. The process is things like ITIL. Other people will be familiar with. We have our own take on that called MOF, which is Microsoft Operations Framework as well. That's been around for a number of years. But I mean, I think the data speaks for itself. I mean, and Andy's got another few slides talking about this. We've already seen where we've actually gone out and we've spoken to lots and lots of real people about this, people who are doing this, people who are not doing this, and on balance, and the trend is that people who are doing this, they are more satisfied, their users are more satisfied, you know, the linkage between business IT is better, and so on and so forth. So I think the proof is there, if you like, but I appreciate it's not going back to what I was saying before, it's not a magic pill, it's not a panacea, but there's definitely things worth exploring there. And in terms of the technology, I think, yes, the technology is supporting this more and more. So I work for Microsoft, I've worked for other companies in the past.
We forgive you.
Thank you. In terms of systems management. So I do have some insight into systems management outside of Microsoft, and I've definitely seen the technology has been moving more and more and more to support this way of doing things. I mean, in terms of System Center, our earlier versions of System Center were very server-focused. They really monitored and managed the server level, and that's not good enough anymore, as we've already talked about, and as we'll see later on. You know, services consist of many, many components. They can be very complex things when you break them down, not to mention the end-user experience. In the past, we've never had the technology to easily map all that and monitor all that as a holistic service. And it's getting better and better all the time. Today, you know, we have a very good story around that. And again, we'll show that in the demo later on.
Well, we have with us an interesting analyst. Is this true? Is this your experience?
What we generally see is, of course, IT continually evolves over time. And what we've generally found is, in many companies, that results in a fragmented IT framework, both from an application perspective, from an infrastructure perspective, but especially also from a management perspective. But it's not like this is an unsurmountable problem. What we find is where IT is well aligned with the business, they actually have a very well joined up IT management environment. It's not that it's impossible to get to, but it requires a lot of focus, investment, etc. to move towards. Now, we're not saying every company needs to invest 100% to get there, but what we can do is take the best elements and actually improve the situation. So no matter if you're a company where you're trying to drive cost out of IT, you can probably still get benefit from joined-up management and a services-based approach because you're cutting overhead. But if you're also, on the other hand, an innovative company, you can actually accelerate your innovation and your speed to market, for example.
Which is kind of what your next slide's about.
Absolutely. So what we can see here is the difference in integration between those who are well-aligned, where IT is well-aligned with the business, and those that aren't. So it's not unachievable. It's patently there. People can do it. But as we say, it requires a lot of proactive investment. In fact, what we see is for companies where IT is well aligned, they have a rolling investment cycle in management tools. They will buy best-of-breed management tools, for example, to augment a single main suite, and they will do that on an annual basis. Whereas those where IT is a cost centre, they'll typically only go with the default management that comes with the product. They won't have any proactive systems in place.
So at the bottom where it says very well joined up, that means that the management is joined up with the whole IT?
That means different tool sets work together so that you're able to get an integrated view across all the different systems. And what you're also able to do is it's not only an integrated view, but it's integrated management. So when you want to change something, you don't have to go to individual silos to keep changing things.
So which of these comes first? Which is cause and how does the cause and effect work?
Generally, we do find that people attempt to put structure in place first before tools, and usually what happens is that the structure and process gets put into place, and they find it very difficult to scale, very difficult to implement on a manual basis. And then that's what we find tends to drive the investment in the tools that go behind enabling this. But of course, if there's an IT transformation project, it can all be done at once, and the tools are there to enable it. So it's the right approach for any business will be different depending on the objective.
Okay, I've got a question here. Regarding the driving costs point, I think it's important to mention that with service-based budgets, there's a hedge against an across-the-board budget cut. IT, if properly tracking costs by service, can ask the business to make a decision as to what's no longer necessary to run the business, which I think is a fair question.
Yeah.
So how do they answer that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And, a couple of the projects that I've been involved with have been around asking that question. What are we actually using IT to the best, both financially and strategically? And I think, again, this is about collecting the right data from IT and being able to put that in the right type of views to be able to understand what's going on. I think, I was involved with a project not very long back where we did an analysis of all the customers' applications and servers and infrastructure, and we found that through the very cash-rich times before we kind of entered this recent economic crisis, that they'd been spending a lot of money. A lot of departments have been commissioning applications, and we had servers in the data center that were racked up to 2 years, and they would have a SQL database on. They'd be running one application, and with a little bit of analysis about what it costs to both support that application and rack that application, and the ongoing infrastructure costs around running that and the resources required to keep it up, we found that actually these applications weren't actually they were actually leaking money rather than bringing money into the organisation. But again, it's about looking at all the different data sources you've got, bringing them into one place and doing analysis across the board and finding out what you actually are spending money on well. Another point that I want to quickly make here as well is that, while we're talking about the recession, that we've all been going through, that's kind of driven some new paradigms in IT. And I think virtualization obviously is a big push that's been driven, people consolidating their assets onto virtualized platforms. And this has led to a lot of standardization across, no longer is the hardware the thing that we're looking at to support applications. We're looking at having standardized hardware and putting applications on top of that. And I think this really does make the idea of doing service level management a lot easier, because we are managing things that are a lot more consistent in their approach. And also, just on another point back there about, companies that I do work with a lot of companies that don't have the single tool, that maybe have multiple tools, and that's a reality. Where companies have grown up and they have multiple departments that have got tools, there's a problem with prizing the users and the IT departments away from those tools and onto a single platform. So we're finding that orchestration is a big key. I'm seeing a big push towards orchestration products, and in those situations where I've got multiple products, if I can't standardize on a platform, maybe I can put an orchestration tool in that can at least make all those platforms talk to each other, or at least say the same thing.
Andy, I mean, your next point is exactly, I think, to do with that multiple tool problem.
Absolutely, and what we generally find is that where you've got a fragmented IT environment, there are a lot of disjoints and difficulties in getting a coherent view of what's doing what. And particularly if you're wanting to deliver an end-to-end service, this is a way to actually get in the way of that. For example, if you've got 6 different systems, hardware, software, networking, maybe WAN infrastructure in between, how do you troubleshoot what areas there are? You've got to get maybe 6 teams mobilized, all these types of people now looking at one single problem. Whereas if you can take an end-to-end view, you can pinpoint where in that service delivery chain something has a problem. You can actually drill down, have much more efficient use of resources. You're not just throwing bodies at a problem, you're throwing intelligence at a problem. And that's really, I think, the whole driver behind this move to service-centric delivery. The other thing is, of course, it enables things like virtualization. At the moment, we may be consolidating, but the next step is dynamic IT, private, maybe even public cloud in the future. And if we don't take that end-to-end view, there's going to be too many places in between where something can break, so that the whole virtualization value that's meant to be coming, all we'll end up with is server sprawl, for example. We'll have virtualization sprawl without any increase in the service delivery.
Makes it even more difficult for the bloke in the data centre to figure out which machine isn't working by unplugging a network.
I think it's worth making the point, virtualization by itself is not necessarily a good thing. It's a neutral thing. It can be done. We speak to customers who do it well, customers who do it poorly, and often, I appreciate it's not the only reason to go to virtualization, but often the first drive of virtualization is because they've got a whole bunch of physical servers. This physical server sprawl we're talking about, very, very low utilization, so virtualization installations just seems a perfect answer to that. But without some good, again, service management or some management around this, then what can happen is that you have much worse virtual service sprawl than you ever had physical service sprawl. I mean, say what you like about physical computers, they don't tend to move from one end of the data center to the other without you noticing. You can't always say the same about virtual servers unless you have some management around this.
This is true, but we do need to crack on because time is always pressing. Let's talk about what needs to be addressed. Now, I've probably pressed the wrong button here. Here we go. There we go. So here we've outlined the problem. Let's talk a bit more about what you think the solution is, Ellis.
Yeah, well, on this slide, so it's giving you some suggested functions and some processes and some tools to actually start to address this. So I appreciate there's quite a lot on that slide, and this is not something that's done in the first weekend or the first month. It's something that you can address over time. But some very practical things on the service portfolio management. So my left of that slide, that's actually suggesting a place where the business and the IT can actually, our IT department can actually get together and discuss about the current services and how well they're supporting the business, but almost more importantly, to talk about the strategy going forward as well. What is the business strategy? Where are we headed? What do we think of cloud, for example? Is it something we want to pursue, or we just don't assume it is? It may not be. It may not be right for us. Is cost cutting our aim, or is innovation and agile delivery, etc., our aim? So that's so the service portfolio is all about explaining the services you've got, explaining their worth to the business, the cost to the business, and so on and so forth. At the other end of that slide, we have the service catalogue, and again, it's a very practical thing, and it's not really technology as such. I mean, it's handy to have a website, but effectively, this is a page on the intranet that your user can go to. You can see a listing of services, who the main contacts that services are. The SLAs, what as a user, how should I expect this service to be available to me? How often, and what sort of level? Is it going to be available 7 days a week, or does it stop at 6 p.m. on a Friday night? Just fairly simple things like that, but can be tremendously useful. And that could be a starting point. I know customers have taken that a lot further. So, for example, they've put some automation around that. So some of the services can actually be, the user can actually go and have an element of self-service. So even down to things like a new server. So virtualization these days facilitates that. And that's, of course, one of the main tenets of private cloud, is this whole idea of self-service. So potentially they can go to the catalogue and they can see one of those services offered is actually a virtual machine. And if it's appropriate for them, they might be able to actually create one there on the fly. It can be done.
Well, we've actually had a user ask, a viewer ask pretty much that question. What are your best ideas for improving service delivery that don't have hard costs? And perhaps there's a good question for you. For example, licensing infrastructure, additional staff. How do you improve service delivery for those things?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the service catalogue is a good example of that. It's been proven really to improve user satisfaction, and you don't have to have all the bells and whistles around it. It could be a simple, a simple web page with a listing of services, an explanation of what those services provide, who to speak to if it goes wrong, what sort of level of service to expect, and so on and so forth. Perhaps a procedure, perhaps an email or something to email somebody to actually request that service. And actually going back to an earlier question about how do we know when to retire services, a service catalogue could be an excellent source of, not the only input, but an excellent input to that. If we see a particular service is being requested constantly, then maybe that's a place for extra investment. If we see a service that's not been requested for the last 12 months or whatever it might be, then that might be a service that who is actually using that service anymore.
Yeah, and coming back again to things like the costs. Licensing is a massive issue in many companies, very difficult to get to grips with, knowing actual usage and what's the appropriate amount to spend. You can actually start to save money very quickly by putting in place a service delivery infrastructure that monitors what's actually in use and how it's used. So you can go back armed with information, again, to an integrator, reseller or IT vendor to actually say, this is our actual usage, let's have a chat about what our appropriate cost should be, for example.
Well, let's talk about that. We have another Microsoft slide, Ellis.
Yeah. So I was about to say on the previous slide. So I know we introduced a lot of sort of concepts and tools, etc. there. So for some real concrete step-by-step advice on how to start implementing this, then if you go to Microsoft.com/MOF. MOF, it stands for Microsoft Operations Framework. Effectively, there's a lot of detail there behind all of these things that we're looking at right now. Some real practical examples about how to go about implementing these things. So if you roll the slides, forward one, and in particular, there's a white. Are we looking at the service map?
No, we should be
That's the one. That's the one. So there is, for example, this is something called service mapping, and often it can be the best place to start. So if you've got nothing in place as yet, where do I start? What's my entry point for this? So you've already got some services out there, whether you think of them as services right now, currently manage them as services. No doubt you've got services out there. So, start from a service and understand how it breaks down into the various different, I think Andrew mentioned this before, he's going through the list of things like software, hardware, the other services that this one also relies on, example, settings and contacts, the customers who uses this service. And once you start to draw out a service, you'll see that sometimes for even what you thought was quite a simple service before, it actually has quite a lot of dependencies and quite a lot of complexity to it, and so it gives you an idea of what you have to understand and who's responsible for bits and pieces. So effectively, if you go forward one slide, sorry. I'm going to apologise. I know you're going to
huge, humongous Microsoft slide here.
Beat me up. It doesn't
but you can download it. Don't forget.
You can download it, and hopefully on the download you can read some of this, some of these things that probably you can't see on the screen right now. But I apologise in one way for this slide, but another way I don't, because I almost wanted to show you for some of these services. This is just the reality of it. They are complex. Once you start drawing it out, you will find, gosh, this particular service, there's a lot of teams involved in this service. There's a lot of moving parts, if you like. Maybe there are dependencies that are outside of my direct control. Maybe there's third parties are relying for this particular service. So imagine without some kind of a view of a service like this, some kind of a map, somebody comes to you and says, well, I want to agree a service level agreement with you. I think 99.999 sounds about right. What about you? Without some kind of a real understanding of the depth and the complexity of this service, that can be a very difficult question to answer. Maybe it is realistic. Maybe it isn't. Maybe there are large fundamental parts of this service that are not under your direct control. Obviously, at that point, you can't guarantee any sort of level of availability if it's outside of your control. So this is a great starting point to understand how a particular service, all the components break up to, lead up to it, and how which teams are involved, which teams are responsible for individual components, etc. And this is a great starting point to actually then go to the technology. Because obviously, this is okay. I think that was probably created in Visio or something, but you could do it literally with a piece of paper and some coloured pens.
Crayons, yeah.
Absolutely. Good way to start, actually. And anecdotally, we do hear, this of people who've created a map and literally just pinned it up somewhere and watch people walk past this map, and before it will actually spark some interesting conversation. So, well, you missed this team off. That's actually, without this team, that's not going to work, or without this component, that's not going to work, or whatever. Or that component was actually decommissioned 12 months ago. You do realise that, don't you? We do hear these sort of stories. But this is a great starting point to actually now go to the technology and start to build out sort of a more realistic or more real-world view of this service using sort of the deep monitoring that we have available these days.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think a key to the last couple of slides that Ellis has shown there, particularly around service catalogues and service mapping, is because they're both quite technical concepts Ellis is talking about there. And service catalogue from a technical point of view, being able to provision virtual machines and provision those applications, that's a thing that's out of the reach of users. And I think a key to this moving
I should say they don't have to be, mind you. I mean, maybe I didn't explain myself very well, but a service catalogue may just be a relatively simple listing of services, and something you can add, the extra bells and whistles as you go along. And certainly self-service is a nice thing to have, but it doesn't have to be there from the beginning.
Would you ask end users to come up with the services they want?
I mean, the point I was going to make on that is that a key to that is having an interface that the users can very easily interact with. So it's having a website with a simple set of instructions that actually translate on the back end to those more complicated instructions. And that's a key for your service catalogue, having a very simple interface that a user can go and doesn't have to think about technology. They can say, hey, I need to run my application, and my application is a marketing application. It has this requirement for memory, it has this requirement for disk space, it has this requirement for processing power. Just go and make that happen for me. And the user gets delivered back something, and he can have a lease slice on it. So, and then at the end of the day, he gets a bill back that says, right, that's how much it's going to charge your cost center. And one thing that I think is key to a lot of the things we've talked about is accountability. I think accountability more today than in the past has been key. Because again, we've talked about VM sprawl quite a lot, and I think once you bring accountability to the table for VMs being built, you watch how quickly VM sprawl disappears in your organisation. Once people have to pay for that, and that's some of the core concepts that are starting to come in place around private cloud solutions that we're seeing, that accountability for business units. So I think, to answer your the question that came in, you know, to be able to empower, what do you do when you've got less resources and less people? Well, you put more power in the user's hand, but you put power in the user's hand that you can control, that's accountable, and that is easily extendable for you on the back end, and easily extendable depending on the type of user that you've got. And I think that's key. And I think with the service mapping, you know, obviously Ellis has shown quite a complex service map, and I think what I'm going to show you next in the video is how we can take something like that really complicated service map, and how we can put it in something that various levels of the business can use and consume.
Okay, so Gordon, if we can roll your video, and
No problem at all.
you can talk to it. It's basically what we're doing here is demoing what we're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. So around the theme of service-centric data center management, I'm going to talk about end-to-end modeling, and I'm going to talk about my favourite product, System Center Operations Manager. And what we've actually got in front of you here is what we call a distributed application diagram, or DAD. And it's a simple representation of a line of business application. And this is a BI application called CIO- that we've got in a data center environment. And you can see that we broke it down to 3 key layers: services, network, client experience. The services contains our back-end application components. Our network contains some elements that tell us what the network is doing from an end-user perspective. And our client experience is this bit that I've been talking about in depth, about capturing the end-user experience. And if we drill down into this services layer and look at exactly what's in there, we can see that it's broken down into a number of key elements. And I'm just going to expand this open here. And you can see that I've got back-end, front-end and middle tier, 3 logical business layers. And if I drill down into the back-end, you can see I've got databases. I've got a couple of databases that support my back-end there. And over on the right-hand side here, you can see that I've got my SQL Server components, and I've even gone all the way down to my operating system component. I could even include a hardware layer in there as well. And it's actually my whole stack that takes up my back-end, and the front-end would be similar with websites. Now, if I look over here at my client experience layer, what I've actually done is I've stuck a desktop PC out in 3 locations where my end users are, and I'm running the top 3 transactions against my application. In this instance, I've got 3 types of users from each of those locations that actually use my front end. I've got an executive user, or my CIO, a very important user to me as an IT support guy. I've got my a business analyst, and I've also got a first-line support guy. And the key here is that I'm running these from a number of different locations that represent where my users are located. Now you can see in the middle, I'm also doing a network layer, and I'm using one of the best network tools known to man, SNMP ping, or ICMP ping, I should say. And the key there is that I'm running those pings from the exact same locations where my end users are. So I can basically understand when there's an outage, whether that's a network outage or back end. Now I'm going to jump in here, and I'm going to actually stop one of my websites on the back end. And you can see almost straight away, and you can see I've trimmed the video a little bit here, but you can see almost straight away that I've got a red arrow, and what I've got at the top here is a little problem path button. So what I've done is I've clicked on the problem path, and instantly I can see that it's my back-end services that's got a problem. I can see it's a website, and more importantly, I can understand what the business impact is. I can see that one of my users in each of my locations is down. I can see that my network layer is green, so I know that it's not a network-related issue, but I can understand that it's an actual website component, and I can go straight down to that particular website, and I can right-click, come up the Health Explorer view, and in here I can see a summary of why the website's down. I've got some possible causes for why that might have occurred, and some possible resolutions how I might go out to fix that. And if I jump over into this state change view, more importantly, I can view all the other times that down has occurred, so I can understand if it's an ongoing issue. Now, if I go back to my knowledge pane here, you see at the bottom I've got a little blue link which says Start Website. Now, this is an inline task, so as a first-line operator, I can go in here and I can basically start that website automatically from this Health Explorer view. And you can see there that my website started. And when I go back to my distributed application view and do a quick little refresh, I can see that everything's gone back to green. So what I've done here is I've done instant root cause analysis of a problem by doing some distributed. And if we can just stop that there. So I've done so just to recap on that, what I've done is I've built a distributed application model that contains my services, my end user experience, and some networks, some very simple network monitoring that I'm doing. And when an issue occurs, I'm able to basically click a problem path button and identify straight away what the root cause of the application going down. Not running around, when an end user rings up and says, I can't get at my dashboard, not running around finding out, is it a network problem, is it a service-related problem, let's go and speak to the database team, let's go and speak to the iOS team. One view where I can pinpoint the problem, and one set of tasks where I can solve that problem and ultimately fix that problem in the shortest amount of time, which is what it's all about.
Sounds like an awful lot of integration work to me.
Yeah, I mean, everything that I showed you there is out of the box with Operations Manager. Obviously, you need to design your distributed applications, although some of the management packs like Active Directory and SMS and AD, for example, come with out-of-the-box distributed application designs that are automatically generated. But most of the time, obviously with custom line of business applications, there's no way that we could kind of know what they're going to look like, and they're ever changing in a lot of organisations. So there's a little bit of design work, but there's a very easy use to design it to get to that point. And there's nothing there that you couldn't do in an hour's worth of work.
No, and I just make the point that distributed application is built up. It's a nice graphical drag and drop interface, and the mechanics of it, I feel, are as easy as they can be. Really, there's no scripting that we're hiding from you there. It's all very, very simple to do. If you little plug for my service map here, if you start with the service map, and you've got a good example of, you've got a good idea exactly how the map should look in Operations Manager. And although I know Gordon purposefully kept in the sort of little manual click on the link there, but it's very simple in Operations Manager as well to automate that piece. So you could cut out the middleman to an extent. You say, right, if this happens in future, just do this, and this could be running a command line or a script or something more complex.
That's a really good point. I think the automation side. So again, we've done a project just recently with another system center product called Aparlis, which is one of the recent acquisitions, and it's basically an IT process orchestration engine. So in this instance, we had a customer that had a website very similar to one that we were looking at, and they found that basically they were getting an engineer out of bed, all hours to come out and fix this website problem when it was down. And the engineer would come in and he would do 6 things basically to try and bring that application back online. And it really was as basic as restarting the SQL Server, restarting the web server, checking some key services, looking in a couple of logs. And we're like, wow, that's a lot of time and money and a lot of pressure on a resource to be able to do that. So what we did was we put in a workflow that when Operations Manager detected that the site was down, it automatically ran through that set of checks, and then it basically did a URL check against the site, and if the website was up, then that was fine. It put a green tick in Operations Manager, and it put a remediation note to say it's fixed the problem. If it was down, it then kicked off a text message to the engineer and got him out of bed. So I think there's 2 elements. There's proactively monitoring your applications end to end, and there's looking at what processes you can automate to make your IT more dynamic.
Question from an end user. Sorry, Andy. What's the tool you were using to do that?
That was System Center Operations Manager 2007. So that was basically the distributed application design.
Thank you.
In there.
Yep. And just to come back to the point on automation, what we find in the recent studies we've done is that operations staff are typically very overstretched. So there's a lot of people trying to do a lot of work that automation can help with. But what we do find is that there's not a lot of automation in practice. So it is very much about making the effort to get these management tools in place, taking the time to design these workflows and put them in place. We've seen that the best run IT organisations actually have no problem with end-to-end IT management. They're the best at automation. It's not a black art, but it is a lot of effort, but it's well worth it.
So I know that you've got a bit more on this video.
Yeah,
if you want
definitely,
to
yeah.
crack on the next level of automation.
That's great. The kind of view that I showed you there was very much a technical view. I kind of call it my ground zero view, if you like. It's my technical support guy. It's that kind of
down
view.
And dirty.
Down and dirty. But my application owner, service owner, wants something a little bit more high level. He doesn't want to drill around and find the problem. He just wants to know what's down. So we can roll the video. Here we've got the service owner's view, what I call the service or application owner's view. So again, we're looking here at the first line technical view. Again, very technical view, the ability to drill down and right click and look at the the monitors and the rules that are under it. But my service owner wants something a bit high level. So here we're using a tool from a third party called Civision Live Maps, and these are a company that specialise in system centre tools. So this is exactly the same view of the environment, but it's what we call 5,000 feet. So I've laid everything out nice. I've got these nice flashing lights on there, so it's a great plasma screen view, but it's looking at exactly the same distributed application view. And again, you know, I've got other views. Here's a map of the world, for example, so I could have my data center locations. Again, very visible, flashing red lights. You can even put an audio alarm on this. And this integrates very cleanly with Operations Manager. And I've even got a 50,000 feet view here, you know, if you want something a much more high level. But it's being able to take that view and put it in something that the service owner can view there. If you could just pause that there.
Yeah, one question we've had in on that, in fact, is how simple is that in a mixed OS apps environment?
Okay, so one great thing about Operations Manager, you know, it's no longer just a platform for managing your Microsoft applications. I mean, Operations Manager now comes with out-of-the-box cross-platform agents. So, you know, you can manage Solaris, HPUX, AIX, SUSE Linux, Red Hat. And I know with the next release, they're looking at expanding that platform more. The other great thing is, you know, Microsoft write the Microsoft stuff because they know the application well. You know, they write the management packs for SQL and Exchange, but they don't claim to know Oracle or WebSphere and Java and things like that. So there is a very strong ecosystem around Operations Manager where people are writing very good management packs. And in fact, you know, the solution that I just showed you there is by a third-party system center integrator. Microsoft are very keen on
what were they called again?
They were called Civision.
Civision.
Yeah, and it's called Live Maps, the solution. And that, again, just gives me the ability to be able to build views. Microsoft also have a Visio snap-in, and that's kind of like a more advanced version of that. But it allows me to build views, bring in Visio diagrams, and again, it's just to give that visualization up a couple of levels. Microsoft produce very technically good products. They don't always have the kind of views that different people in the business want to see. So building those views and using technologies to do that is important. I think commitment to, going back to the original question, commitment to cross-platform is very much paramount with Microsoft. I think they're very committed to supporting applications. I know there's been another acquisition of a product that does very deep .NET monitoring, and I know later down the line they're looking at supporting platforms like Apache and WebSphere. So you know, it's no longer you should no longer kind of think of Operations Manager as a platform that really is just very Windows centric.
Sorry, I was there as a Microsoft guy here. You know, historically we've always go back a few years, and really we just concentrated on the Microsoft stuff, and we had partners. We always had a good cross-platform story. We always had lots of partners who added those things on for us, and that's still pretty much the case today. But increasingly and more, we are actually getting into the sort of native monitoring of cross-platform. Third-party applications and OSs, etc. As Gordon mentioned, I mean, the workflow tool that you were talking about before, for example, another System Center product, is by its nature very, very cross-platform. In fact, it has, in some ways, it supports more sort of third-party and cross-platform tools than the Microsoft tools. It's a relatively small part of what it can do. And going forward, it's just going to get more and more. Yes, okay, very deep .NET application monitoring today, but tomorrow J2E, etc. as well is certainly the planned roadmap. We already support VMware, for example, as a hypervisor, and again, the plan is to add more hypervisors rather than fewer going forward. So we realise it's not all Microsoft all the time. Frankly, even within Microsoft, we have other tools. It's not all Microsoft, even within Microsoft. So it's never going to be.
The doors are slowly creaking open.
Absolutely. We play well with others. That's the message certainly, and increasingly more so. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. I wanted to, so I've kind of showed you a couple of views there. I've showed you the technical support view, and I've showed you the service owner views. And I want to show you now something that we've been talking about quite a lot, the SLA type view. So Operations Manager also has built into it service level tracking or service level objectives. And if you could just roll the film, and what I'm going to show you here is the CIO view. Now, the CIO doesn't necessarily have to know when an application is down. You know, he only needs to know whether his SLA is being met. So in that example that we had, we actually found a problem as a first-line guy or a service owner. We fixed that particular problem, and we've basically done that within our SLA. So does the CIO need to see that there's been a problem? No, he doesn't. There's agreed framework and there's agreed SLA. He only needs to see a 50,000 feet view of the environment. So here we have the service level dashboard, which is a free solution accelerator from Microsoft. And in this, I have my CIO Dash app. So I'm looking at the same distributed application design that my first line guy is looking at. But what I'm looking at is availability and performance. You can see it's green, because although my application's actually been down, I've actually fixed it, and you can see on the availability, I've just lost a little bit there, but I've actually fixed it within the time zone, and the CIO can see this nice long timeline at the bottom, and he can see how the application has been performing, and he might look at this over 30 or 60 days. And again, in here, I can see client network services. But it's SLA driven, so I've got 99.9% on availability and 95% on performance. And the point to make here is that I'm looking at the same data. So I've got 3 levels of the business that are looking at the same underlying service-centric view. Yeah, so when they have these conversations, they can have joined-up conversation. Here's another thing that we do for customers. This is a customized dashboard that we've done. Again, it's looking at the same type of data, and this is just using SQL Reporting Services 2008. So we took some of those new Dundas controls, and we basically built some dashboards around Windows 7 monitoring. And in here, I've got Windows login time, and we're looking at application crashes. But this is a typical thing that we will provide for a customer, and we'll push basically into a SharePoint site, and we'll deliver overall to a customer type view. So again, very graphically pleasing, the ability to drill down, and again, nice. All of the stuff we've been looking at, you can deliver in a SharePoint portal. So that's kind of the CIO view. I've got one view that I'd like to just jump on and show you quickly at the end.
Really quickly,
if that's
we're
okay.
running out of time.
Yeah. So the final view that we've got, and if you could just roll it again, is the business analyst view. So again, another important member of the team. What he wants to look at the same data, but he wants something that he can do some slice and dice analysis. So what we typically do for customers here is we'll stick an OLAP cube or an analysis services cube on top of the operations manager data warehouse. And what we do is we use a Microsoft product called Performance Point, which was actually free with Office 2007, and it's actually fully integrated into Office 2010 now, and it's basically a business analyst tool. It used to be the product called ProClarity, and here I can take that same data, but I can put it into a format that a business analyst or a capacity planner can use. So, for example, I can look at my SLA measurement, I can look at it over a couple of years and see, has my SLA been slipping over a period of time? I can look at stats around alerts by quarter, what would be my worst quarter, so that's my important sales quarter. Am I seeing a lot of errors in that quarter? Is there anything that I can do to address that? And more importantly, kind of what-if analysis. So if my SLA keeps slipping at this rate, what's it going to look like in 6 months' time? My users connecting onto SharePoint. Here's a great view based off that DAD model. I've got my HTTP ping transaction against, or my ICMP ping transaction against my HTTP transaction. So I can view whether, over a period of time, my user is actually being impacted by network performance. And that can quite often, bring to the table network-related problems rather than service-related problems.
Interesting stuff, Gordon. I'm afraid we are running very short of time at the moment, so I'd like to explore that a little further. But 30 seconds each, Andy, Ellis?
Well, from my point of view, it's management and integration is the way to go. The problem is getting the business management to see the value of the investment, because it does pay itself back.
Well, Gordon, that was a great demonstration. It brought together a lot of the things we were talking about before. We had the end user view in that. We had the different, as Gordon said, it's the same service, the same underlying data, but it really brought out the points of interest for different people. The business users, the technical users, even the end users themselves. So I think we brought together a lot of the things we talked about today very well.
And finally, the challenges. I know, Andy, you've got a final slide here where we're going to talk about what you regard as the significant blockers to investment. Now, if you can do this in 30 seconds, that'd be great.
Yeah, so, cost is always a prime issue, so we'll skip those. That's always the way. But really, it's about making the case to management, and it's having the foresight and the ability to push this through to actually change the way IT works. You don't need the business to drive change in IT. IT can do this for its own sake to become better aligned, more valuable to the business. And this ends up being a virtuous circle. So the better aligned you are, the more you can prove your value, what you're getting in, what you're putting out. the more funding you're likely to get. And this is what we see in the best run, most aligned IT organisations. So there's a step to take if you want to improve the situation within the business.
That's great. Okay, Andy Buss from Freeform Dynamics, Gordon McKenna from Inframon, and Ellis Paul from Microsoft, I think. Thank you very much indeed for this. Coming up next, thanks very much for watching. Our next Regcasts are, first of all, we've got registered to attend the Hyper-V Cloud Roadshow, and that's 6 regional events across the UK, London, Birmingham, Aberdeen, Reading, Manchester and Edinburgh throughout March and April. There's a URL on your screen, so check that out now. And if you missed it, moving beyond consolidation, the steps towards a private cloud. That's the next Regcast. And so it remains only for me, Manek, Dubash, to say thank you. Thank you to our panellists here.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Hope it was useful.